We got a great interview for you guys today. A guy you might be familiar with. His name is Senator Bernie Sanders joining us now. Senator Sanders, you have a town hall coming up on Monday on the issue of Iran and the deal that we just withdrew from. Can you tell us what that's about?
Cenk, it seems to me that in general, the Congress has abdicated its responsibility to the White House in terms of war-making responsibility. And as a nation, we don't discuss foreign policy. And I am especially concerned about the reckless nature of this president. I think withdrawing from the Iran nuclear treaty agreement is a very dangerous act. And I think we need a serious discussion about the implications of what that means short-term and long-term. And we brought together a panel of folks, and we're going to live stream it all over the country, and we're going to be working with you guys to try to get the word out so that people better understand what Trump's withdrawal from the treaty means.
So it's going to be at 7 o'clock Eastern on Monday night. We're going to carry it on the Young Turks, and there's going to be four great experts on this issue. Normally when you do these town halls, you break it up into different segments. What are the different topics you guys are going to talk about in regards to Iran and this deal?
I think this one we're going to do it in a little bit different way. I think what we want to talk about is an area that I think people know very little about, is the history of modern US-Iranian relationships. I wonder, and what unintended consequences are about, Cenk. You know, you have politicians and presidents throughout history giving these great bellicose speeches, and their poll numbers go up. Oh, they're gonna go to war and they're gonna bring freedom and democracy to everybody. You know, we heard that in terms of the war in Vietnam. We heard that in terms of the war in Iraq. But I think people don't even know that back in 1953, the United States, along with the British, overthrew a democratically elected prime minister named Mohammad Mossadegh, reinstalled the Shah of Iran, who was a hated despot, which led to the Iranian Revolution, the Islamic Revolution of '79, and the taking of hostages, and all the way to where we are today. So let's get a sense of unintended consequences, know something of the history of the region. The other thing, and Cenk, this is what concerns me maybe more than anything. You are seeing Trump providing over $100 billion in arms sales to Saudi Arabia. This is a monarchy. This is a autocratic society which treats women as third-class citizens, which has a Wahhabism ideology, which is extremist, spreading that all over the world. And what I worry about very much is the United States becoming allied with Saudi Arabia, getting sucked into a never-ending Shia-Sunni battle, religious war in the Middle East. We have been, as you know, in Afghanistan for 17 years. We've been in Iraq for 15 years. And I don't want to see us get drawn into a never-ending war in the Middle East.
The United States and our allies starting hostilities as we did in 1953, and that was a democratically elected government that we overthrew for the sake of profits for American and British oil companies. That almost never gets talked about. And just today we had Iran and Israel exchange rocket fire, and that is incredibly dangerous. And there, 1 hour after Trump said that he was going to withdraw from the treaty, Israel launched missiles into Syria, into Iranian positions, and killed 15, including 8 Iranians. So we have this right-wing axis of the Trump administration, Netanyahu administration, and Saudi Arabia, as you correctly point out. How dangerous is that, and how much do they want to push us in the war?
Add to that, Cenk, and I think your analysis is correct. Add to that the fact that you have a military-industrial complex here in the United States, and that against my vote, we increased military spending by $165 billion over a 2-year period. You add all of those things up, and I worry, as I said a moment ago, about the United States getting drawn into just a war that never ends, that costs us lives. I mean, if you think about the unintended consequences of what happened in Iraq, the killing, not only the loss of lives of not only thousands of our own young men and women, but hundreds of thousands of Iraqis, the displacement of millions of people, the civil war in Syria, and the irony of all of that. And this is what unintended consequences are about. Right now, Trump's major enemy in the world is Iran. As a result of Bush's war in Iraq, Iran now has far more political and military influence in Iran than they ever had before. That's called unintended consequences. The other thing that we should be very concerned about is that an agreement was reached, this nuclear agreement with Iran, not just with the United States, it was reached with 6 other countries, the P5+1. And what should be very concerning to the American people is Trump's movement to unilateralism rather than international cooperation. Whether it is the Middle East or any other place in the world, what has got to happen is we need international cooperation. We need the United Nations. We need a lot of diplomacy to resolve these issues. And I worry very much about people who are very quick to pull the trigger, especially when we're dealing in the Middle East with Saudi Arabia and Netanyahu in Israel.
So let's dive a little bit more into that. Let me just note, though, that it is both tragic and amusing that the so-called genius Dick Cheney and George Bush couldn't figure out that Iraq is 60% Shia and would naturally be aligned with Iran after the war. That's unbelievable. Now they complain about it. And if you like the Iraq war, Iran is 4 times larger than Iraq. So boy, the trouble we can get ourselves into is untold. But let's talk about other reasons why Trump might be motivated to start these hostilities. So on the issue of Saudi Arabia, during his campaign, he registered 8 properties in Saudi Arabia. So he might literally have a financial interest in doing the bidding of the Saudi government. And now basically being led by the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who is dead set against Iran and has attacked Iranian interests throughout the Middle East and including the disastrous wars in Yemen. Could it be possible that Trump is motivated by more than what he perceives to be national security interests, but more of his own financial interests?
I just don't know enough about that. I suppose that at one level you would say, well, that is completely crazy. How could a president bring us to war to protect his own personal financial interests? But with Trump, who knows? But notwithstanding that, I find it very disturbing that for many years, the United States has seen its natural ally in that area to be Saudi Arabia. And I think many viewers have not forgotten where most of the 9/11 terrorists came from. Now, have not forgotten that Saudi Arabia is behind the funding of Islamic extremist ideology in schools throughout the world, and that they are an incredibly autocratic regime. You can't, dissent in Iraq. They exploit foreign workers ruthlessly. And it just disturbs me very much how many politicians in our country and the president seems to think that this is a trustworthy ally. They are not. Now, Iran, we have also serious concerns with about their behavior and their support for terrorism. But the goal of the United States of America should be to bring people together, to tell the world we are not going to fund never-ending wars, that we use our political influence to say, let's sit down, let's work out these very difficult issues, rather than fuel the fire. There is a responsibility with the most powerful nation on earth to stress diplomacy, to stress the goals of peace, not just provide arms into the region and encourage more warfare.
Right. On the one hand, we have the Saudis, as we just explained, with the Crown Prince, and he claims he's against the Wahhabism. I hope that that's true. But on the other hand, he kidnapped the Lebanese prime minister, or the Lebanese leader, in an insane move. He imprisoned a lot of his fellow princes and extorted about $100 billion from him, imprisoned journalists. and dissidents in Saudi Arabia, et cetera. On the other hand, we also have Netanyahu's government in Israel and their support here in the U.S. So this brings up a really tough issue, Senator Sanders, because you have people like Sheldon Adelson. Now, on the one hand, I hope responsible people in media are a little reluctant to bring those donors up because of some tropes that were used against Jewish Americans in the past and about funding and getting certain things that they want, and that's very understandable. On the other hand, Sheldon Adelson has given over $20 million to Donald Trump and then brags in public about how he got Trump to move the embassy to Jerusalem and how he wanted him to rip up the steel. So what do we do with that conundrum?
Well, Cenk, I mean, by the way, I don't know if you noticed it today, it was in one of the newspapers today. Adelson has just contributed $30 million to the House Republicans. Which for him, by the way, on another subject is not a bad investment because his casinos received hundreds of millions of dollars in tax breaks as a result of the Republican tax bill. But I don't think we have to look at people's religion on this issue, whether it is, whoever it may be. Clearly, people like Sheldon Adelson have enormous influence over the Republican Party, over Donald Trump, and it is a nefarious influence. Sheldon Adelson, as you may know, funds the largest newspaper in Israel, which is basically an organ for Netanyahu. So, as somebody who believes very strongly in the right of Israel to exist, not only exist, but exist in peace and security, we have got to differentiate support for Israel from a very, very right-wing government of Netanyahu.
Absolutely. So, of course, a natural question for you is, not hypothetical for later, but if you were president right now, what would you do with this situation in Iran?
I think you would start telling the leaders of Israel, the leaders of Saudi Arabia, the leaders of countries in that area, that we are not going to continue to supply unended military support, that what the interest of the United States is about is getting these people to sit down and work out the very difficult, these are not easy problems, they have gone on for a long time, but to make it clear that the goal of the United States is peace, is diplomacy, is not never-ending war.
You voted against the sanctions for Russia, North Korea, and Iran. You were one of only 2 votes in the Senate. Some have accused you of saying that you voted for that or against those sanctions because of Russia. But was it because of Iran instead?
Precisely, absolutely, and that's what I made clear. I support. Look, the role that Russia has played in our elections was absolutely unacceptable, and I support sanctions against Russia. But when they were lumped together with Iran, that concerned me, and I think I was right in my concerns given what has happened since.
All right, and one more question about this situation. Given that Israel and Iran seem to be exchanging missiles at this moment, what do we do with that situation? I know that you would push for diplomacy, but once an ally starts hostilities, we're often stuck. You want to support an ally, but at the same time, they clearly started the bombing first. So what do you do in a situation that difficult?
Well, I think what you have got to do is bring the Security Council together. This is just an incredibly volatile situation, which could get out of hand and start a major conflagration. So I think the role of the United States is to get the Security Council meeting to discuss how we can calm things down there in the short term as we move forward longer term to try to resolve some of the very significant political problems in the region.
And we'll end on a nice side note here. You mentioned $165 billion increase in defense spending. Can you remind me how much your College for All program would cost per year?
About half. Yeah, that's right. About just about that per year. Yep. So there you go. There you go. You have the choice of funding the military-industrial complex or transforming American education and making sure that every kid in this country, regardless of income, can get a higher education. I think we have got to change national priorities. Education is more important than funding weapons of destruction.
All right, so everybody, Monday, 7 o'clock Eastern, we'll have it here on tyt.com/live. Senator Sanders and four of the top experts in the country discussing the implications of our withdrawal from the deal with Iran. Senator Bernie Sanders, thank you so much for joining us on the Young Turks.
Thank you, Cenk. Take care.